My next book I'm very, very excited about. It's a YA historical fantasy. And it's, you say sometimes that Black Brother is your most personal book. This I think is probably going to be, it's more personal in some ways than Agnes, although Agnes is very close to my heart. But it's the story of two sisters, two twins, born in the Jim Crow South, and one is white presenting and one is darker skinned. And they're separated at birth after the murder of their parents, because miscegenation was still illegal at that time and people were very endangered for race mixing. But it has ghosts, it has a little touch of magic, and it's been an interesting story to write.
Cool. Well, my next book is actually going to be on climate change. My books have long gestation periods, so it's been in my mind for a very long time. And seeing the fires in Australia and in California, I just think of that as another sort of thing that we as a people need to do to take care of our planet. I do think that I will bring in this time period, the pandemic, the sort of George Floyd continuation of this tragic horror against men, people of color, in a new book that I'll be writing for HarperCollins. It's actually a retelling of a great American classic, which I can't tell you the name of it right now, but I do think I have to write about this time right now and what it's done to people, particularly kids who are part of families where their parents are deemed essential workers. The other thing that I'll tell you before we open it up to questions is, did you know, that's a question, did you know, I'm sorry, Kelly, did you need to say anything? Did I interrupt you?
No, go ahead, no, go.
I gotta tell you, a question group. Did you know that Alexander Dumas was a Black man? He was, yes, I see some nodding of the heads. Yes, he has Haitian and French blood. And I saw a picture of him like 35 years ago. And I went, what? The guy who wrote The Three Musketeers, the most popular writer, in the world almost, was a Black guy? How come I didn't know that? So now it's just coming out in a book, Black Brother, Black Brother. That's how long my gestation periods are. So I think about all the young people who didn't have a model for doing fencing, all the kids who don't like team sports, what would have been great for individual sports such as fencing, and also children of color who could have gotten, great opportunities. And in particular, in Brazil Olympics, our American team had 6 folks of color and 2 Chinese Americans. And there's a whole history for this man named Peter Westerbrook, who's been working to really sort of equalize fencing as a sport for all kids. But I also put that representation in my novel as well. And I just found out the other day that Audubon, the guy who did the Audubon Society, he was a Black Frenchman. I mean, he was Haitian and French. It's like, whoa. So that might be another story. So look for it. But the idea that all of us need our heritage written about, we need to see all the different ways that people are and can be with their heritage and all the wonderful things that they've done. And in fact, I had t-shirts made for Black Brother, because at the very end, all the school kids will celebrate heritage is lit. So everybody should be telling their stories. Last word over to you, Kelly, for now.
Well, I just wanted to say, and this is something because we've been in events before and I've heard you tell the Alexander Dumas story before, but I'm researching this Jim Crow period of the South, and there's this amazing collection of oral histories that it was collected by the University of North Carolina, I think, and it's oral tellings of people who lived through this Jim Crow era, especially in the Deep South. Mm-hmm. And in one of the stories, there's a Black man who mentions specifically Alexander Dumas.
Really? I didn't know that.
And I'll send it over to you. And he says, I never knew that this famous writer, they were getting the hand-me-down books. They'd read the hand-me-down book of this famous writer, and I never knew, but what a difference it would have made to me, like as a young person, in terms of your sense of self-worth, your sense of self-esteem. So seeing ourselves reflected in books, this is an echo from many, many years ago, this man was retelling the story when he was 90. That's how much it mattered to him.
Wow. Oh, that's a wonderful, wonderful story. Well, we were wondering if you guys had any questions. We're happy to answer anything, almost. But anyway, any questions?
This question is going to be from Jasmine, or is it Yasmin?
Yasmin, yeah. Hi guys, hi Jewel, hi Kelly. I'm calling in from Denmark, so it's 11:30 right now, so excuse me sitting and yawning. It's not because you're boring. I just thought I would represent a little bit since I don't have your pen, Kelly, so it's the little ribbon you sent in the mail. Yes. So my question today is, when you wrote your first book, what did you find hardest to write and easiest to write? And how do you write about something you don't know, like characters or setting or dialogue?
Oh, is that for Kelly? Yes?
It's both. It's for both of you.
Oh. You want to start?
I can take it first. In terms of writing what you don't know, I mean, the imagination is a very powerful place. So the most important thing as a writer is for you to believe in the power of your own imagination. It can do a lot. I will tell a little bit of a story though, because imaginations do have limits. I decided to write in this book about a boy with type 1 diabetes. And I had no personal experience of that. Essentially, the reason that Agnes has to leave her cult is because medicine is forbidden there, and her little brother, to whom she's like a surrogate parent, is going to die without insulin. Type 1 diabetes is like one of the most complex conditions out there. And I did my best. I did my research. I read the books. I put as much as I could in there, but there was no replacement for the amazing sensitivity reader that I found. She's also a YA author, and she read over it. So when you're really representing something far outside your experience, I mean, she gave me so many notes and so many corrections, because the last thing I wanted to do was for kids with type 1 diabetes to see themselves poorly reflected in a book. I mean, that just feels bad. I know that as a biracial person, as a light-skinned Black person, it feels bad when that happens. So it depends. I mean, there's a lot that you can imagine, but in terms of certain cultures and identities, when you feel like you've hit your limit, that's when you reach out. And the good news is that we're all so connected by social media now. You can get any type of sensitivity reader, and it's a wonderful thing. And would you like to answer some of that?
Yes, I'll answer the question too. But since Yasmin mentioned the red ribbon, why don't you explain what the red ribbon means in your book?
Yes, the red ribbon. So red is forbidden in the cult that Agnes escapes from. And so it became kind of a symbol in the book for her rebellion. And I have these little enamel pins that we are giving away that say, "Are you in rebellion?" which is also the first sentence of the book and a motto to live by.
Yes, be in rebellion. I'll answer the question. When I started that English class, when I was a junior, the teacher said, write about what you know. And that's pretty much a mantra in a lot of creative writing class, write what you know. Well, what I knew were rats as big as cats, poverty, decrepit buildings, and just, a horrible environment. And so I didn't want to write about what I knew. And I grabbed down a cookbook on Creole and Acadian cooking, and it mentioned Bayou Teche, Bayou of Snakes. It mentioned, Marie Laveau, who was a great voodoo queen in 19th century New Orleans, and it had a lullaby, Fais dodo, mon petit bébé, go to sleep, little baby. And I all of a sudden exploded and became involved in a story of trying to understand, and I've always been about this, trying to understand things that I didn't know about African-American history. How was it that hoodoo has such a negative reputation, in America? And I was led on a quest to write voodoo dreams, write about Marie Laveau, and write about how slaves were not blank slates, and wherever they landed, whether it be Jamaica or Haiti or Louisiana or Georgia, there are elements of religious worship that is African, that is in everything from AME Methodist to Baptist to Haitian voodoo to Rastafarian movements. And so I celebrated that. So I do a lot of research, but instead of thinking about trying to write true what I've experienced, I like to imagine, and because I had an acting background, I do dramatic fiction writing. I end up being all the characters. And I go, what would it have felt like So for the mistress and the wife of Frederick Douglass and Douglass's women, it's like, what would they have felt like, to be the mistress or wife of Frederick Douglass? Now, the middle schoolers, I actually had such a bad childhood. I don't remember much of it. I have repressed it. So I actually think in terms of being called to write for middle schoolers, part of that is also that I'm trying to live through the characters and young people I meet today who were so awesome, my middle school years all over again. I think you can already tell that of the two of us, I'm not like the most immature compared to my daughter. I'm the most goofy. And I think as I've gotten older, trying to keep that inner child of me alive, because I don't consider that I had a childhood. And what I did have, I simply don't remember.
Yeah, and I just wanted to echo, and I saw that Samson actually has a question, the young man here, so we will definitely do that. But I just wanted to say, I also heard write what you know, write what you know. And in some ways it's good advice, but it's limiting advice. I think a better question is like, write what you're curious about. The question that is the most burning to you, that's where you're going to hit your third rail. Like that's where the electricity stems from, I think. So for me in Agnes at the End of the World, I was really curious about faith. Like how do people maintain faith in something, anything, even through the hardest of times? And I have always been fascinated by people who believe, even when the worst happens. And that's what I tried to explore. I certainly, I've never been in a cult. Previously, I had never been in such a big pandemic. Like I had very little to draw on concretely, but I had a curiosity about what the experience might be for my main character.
Thank you.
Peggy Miller has a question as well. Peggy, did you want to ask that of our authors?
Oh, sure. Let me.
Peggy, and also Sam down below. Sam, yes, too. Okay, Peggy.
Oh, I think Peggy got unmuted there, or got muted back. Peggy was wanting to know what was the hardest scene to write in Black Brother, Black Brother, and also what was an early experience where you learned that language had power?
Oh, language had power. I learned from my grandmother. She used to tell me oral stories on the porch. And my grandmother actually raised me because my mother abandoned me and my sister when I was 8 months old and my sister was about 2.5. Grandmother never ever finished 3rd grade. And she came up from Georgia to Pittsburgh to take care of us kids because my father was all suddenly, a single parent. And now when I've studied African-American literature and I've been teaching it, I understand then the power of the word, of how down through the first African who set their feet on American soil, that in telling stories, they kept culture alive. So we are truly, African-American, a unique kind of people who have brought an ancient history and merged it with, an American history. I'm sorry, what was part 2?
The other question was writing Black Brother, Black Brother.
The hardest scene to write. The judge scene. A lot of kids who are involved in the criminal justice, the juvenile justice system is very different. You really just have a judge who's making a decision about their fate. And technically they'll call them delinquents. And that presentation is very, very important. And in that scene, it's like Dante's trying to figure out, how can I get this guy to see me and not just say, oh, you're a stereotypical thug, and lock him up. And so in his mind, it's like a fencing match, how to outwit the judge. And he succeeds in doing it by simply saying, oh, and here's my fencing instructor. Oh, and here's my dad, this talk. And all of a sudden, and it plays out like a chess match where it's like, 2 moves forward, 1 move back, literally strategizing for how to get this judge to see him so he is not, as so many other children of color, disappeared. A judge can say, okay, 2 years, you're locked up. And as they have more for-profit juvie systems, there are actually some kids who are put away because judges are getting kickbacks. There's a whole documentary on Netflix where the judge, yep, sorry, you were sassy in class. Okay, 18 months, bye. And it's just terrible. But that scene was difficult to write.
Okay, and now we're to Samson. Hey, Samson.
Samson.
His question is, do you know what the whole story will be before you write it? Thank you for asking that.
Thank you. I'll start, you finish, Kelly. Samson, actually, I don't. Some writers will plot everything out, and every single morning I sit down anew, and it's sort of like I reread what I've written and then think myself back into the world and just follow wherever the character leads me. I do try to write character-driven stories, and that's what gives it its plot and its adventure. So I think about what the character going, what do I want? What do I need? What do I desire? But no, I don't know where I'm going. And I don't know if you've read Samson Ghost Boys, you know, but I did not.
We will.
Okay, but you'll see in there, and be happy to contact me individually. I didn't know that Sarah, the policeman's daughter, was going to be able to see the black boy ghosts. You know, I then didn't know that Carlos was going to come in with Day of the Dead. So much I didn't know, and it just sort of came out bit by bit. Kelly, do you know how you're going to write?
Well, first of all, Samson, that is such a fantastic question. It's really
He's a writer.
Fantastic question. And in fact, in the world of writers, it's a little bit like Harry Potter houses. You are either, people announce, you know, I'm either a plotter or a pantser, and that's the way it is. And so what Jewell's describing is the fly by the seat of your pants type of writer, where she, this is a real thing from social media, Mom.
I didn't know that.
And a plotter is someone who sits down and does scene by scene everything that's going to happen. And what I say is, I don't think that I have my mother's natural ability for storytelling. There's like 5 or 6 or maybe 10 different skills you need as a writer. And I feel like I have 9 of them. And the storytelling has always been the slightly weak link. And Agnes taught me that. When I had to revise Agnes, it had already been acquired by Little Brown Young Readers, but it really needed a page 1 rewrite. The first edit letter that I got from my editor said, it's not working as a cult novel and it's not working as a pandemic novel, so fix that. So I basically started over, and I used a resource called Save the Cat. It's by Blake Snyder. It's a book on storytelling, specifically screenwriting. And it's a very slender little book, and I was looking around to see if I have a copy to show you, but it's called Save the Cat, and it actually walks you through how a lot of movies follow similar story beats. And so I took that kind of template, and I sort of just, I used it as like a compass more than anything else, because you never know exactly where your story is going to go, because it's true, the characters are alive and have a life of their own, but you can guide yourself with by following some important storytelling rules. Yeah, so Save the Cat, in case you're interested in just how stories are constructed, is a very interesting read.
Now, Samson, I gotta tell you, I've never seen that book, but I dream a lot. And when I'm walking my dogs, I think a lot about stories. But I'll tell you, since you're going to be reading Ghost Boys, I had written what I thought was the entire novel, and my editor said, Jewell, how did the character get the gun? And I hadn't thought about that. And I went, oh, yeah, that's a good point. And I went to bed that night and literally had a dream and woke up, and all of a sudden there was a brand new character that was there, Carlos. Carlos gave him the gun. So very often when I'm writing stories, they just pop out of my head in dreams too. And then I sort of fly by the seat of my pants. But all my life, Samson, I wanted to write for, basically 4th through 9th graders. That's my sweet spot. So I spent 20 some years, 7 books writing for adults, trying to become good enough to write for kids like you. And the very first time I finally clicked was when I was publishing an adult novel about New Orleans. It came out the day that Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans. And then 2 weeks later, my publisher sent me there for book tour, which was goofy, but literally from that experience, it was sort of, I went to bed And all of a sudden, this child's voice that I had been waiting for appeared. And that's when I wrote Ninth Ward. So now I'm doing the best thing that I ever had, I'm doing what I wanted to do. It's the best thing ever. But basically I dream and get all woozy and emotional and fly by the seat of my pants. Thanks for that, Kelly.
Right.
Another question.
Yeah. Okay. Hi, Rachel. Did you want to ask the authors your question? Nice to see you.
Sure, nice to see you. Yeah, my question is that we're living in this really weird and powerful moment. And I'm wondering if you thought of any books besides your own, which are amazing. Thank you so much for putting those stories out there, that you wish readers had in their toolkits for this moment with the pandemic and also kind of the revelation of the intense inequity. What stories do you wish readers had for now?
I was, right, let me think, for adult books, I think The Color of Law is extremely eye-opening. How the American government actively encouraged and made segregation of housing possible. It's just absolutely heart-rendering. Also, one of the stories that I teach that has moved my students over and over again is Just Mercy. And at the very end of Just Mercy, he talks about the link and the historical events that go from slavery up to this moment that we're living in time with the criminal justice system. Yeah. I'd also like to hear people read a play, August Wilson, Joe Turner's Come and Gone. There was, Reconstruction only lasted about 12 years. And then after that, we went into the Jim Crow era. And that's where police really enforced the stealing of land, the abuse of people. And Joe Turner actually speaks about how even though Black men and women were free, but particularly for Black men, they would go hunting for them and just say, okay, all of a sudden now you're not a slave, but you're an indentured servant, and literally cart them in shackles to work for new plantation owner, but outside of slavery for 7 years. So there were periods where there was actual police activism, literally kidnapping and reinforcing people. Actually, and in terms of film, I would encourage people to also see the film, The Birth of a Nation, that in terms of the very first film ever made, it was about the rise of the KKK, which I think speaks a lot. So that's, for adults, and I could tell you more. For kids, I do think Stamped gives that sense of, like Professor Kennedy and Jason Reynolds gives that sense of how literally someone who wanted to oppress somebody just wanted to have somebody who looked so different, and how that claim of you are of color has gone down for centuries, that it's easy for us to recognize you, and therefore when you try to escape, it's easy for us to then, really come after you and hold you. I do think for young people, the new Harriet Tubman movie is really a well done movie. And I'd also say Hamilton the musical, which I also teach, is fantastic because it opens up young hearts to the idea that, oh, wait a minute, America is founded upon immigrants, and seeing all those different actors of different ethnic groups makes for all kinds of excitement. So I'll stop there.
That was wonderful. I have some recommendations for some new YA, some new young adult literature that's come out, Black debut books. Bethany Morrow's A Song Below Water is gorgeous. It's Black Sirens, Black Mermaids, and it's wonderful and extremely empowering, I think, for women anywhere and any race. And then there's A Song of Wraiths and Ruin, which is wonderful if you love like a YA epic fantasy that you can just sink into for days. I also strongly recommend You Should See Me in a Crown by Leah Johnson. It's a very uplifting new book. All these books came out about 2 weeks ago, and every single one of them is worth your time. For pandemic books, especially for adults, actually, for middle graders, I strongly recommend Fever by Lori.
Oh, yes, Lori Halse Anderson.
That was a book that I read while writing Agnes. I believe it's middle grade. If not, it's like right on the line. It's close. And actually, she's also the author of a wonderful series that starts with Chains. That is a wonderful series of books. But Ling Ma's Severance for adults is a book about how pandemics and capitalism intersect. And I think I read it during this pandemic because I tend to be drawn to darker books and to books about the moments that we're going through, because I do believe that stories contain essential wisdom that allow us to survive and thrive as cultures and communities. So Ling Ma's Severance, also A Beginning at the End by Mike Chen, came out in the spring and is wonderful. It's about sort of the second wave of a pandemic hitting San Francisco. And it's just a wonderful read. So those are my recommendations.
Before we go to the next question, real quick, you guys, I think you've heard about the Tulsa race riot, and that's the city where President Trump wanted to speak, and it's the 99th anniversary of a massacre of a Black community. Literally, the National Guard was given permission to drop dynamite on this very successful Black community. I wrote about that 22 years ago in a book called Magic City. And actually, I'm trying to get from HarperCollins them to reprint it or buy my rights back because it was ahead of its time. But in terms of understanding June 10th, Tulsa race riot, and also the servicemen who had come back from fighting in World War I in a segregated army. It's a really important story. And there are high school teachers who use Magic City for high school students. Amanda.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Does anyone else have any questions for our two authors? Thank you for bringing up the Tulsa race riots. I think that's such an important, I'm from Oklahoma. And Oklahoma history in 9th grade, and we didn't even talk about that. So I think it's an important thing to just continually remind people because it's just so overlooked. It's such a major
event. Well, it's really interesting. I was going to Oklahoma often, and the newspaper, the Tulsa Daily World, sent an interviewer who said I deserved the Pulitzer Prize for my book, and they had done a book review, and it never appeared. I told my publisher, oh, you're going to get this great review. It never appeared. And then afterwards, I was at a conference in Oklahoma, and the book review editor said, oh, I'm sorry, it wasn't personal. They just simply never published it. And in Arizona, a good friend of mine who was a book reviewer, she told me years later that she got hate mail because I was talking also about the Klan, and people who told her, there wasn't a riot there and you're terrible. I mean, this is somebody reviewing a book or having a book review they were so afraid of. And Kelly and I, we went to one of the Tulsa World conferences because Maya Angelou was going to speak and I was going to talk about Magic City. And that was the first time in my life, and I think in your life, Kelly, that we actually saw the KKK. And they were marching in their hoods in front of the city hall. And I joked, I said, Kelly, your mom takes you on a field trip and you get to see the Klan. It's like she was maybe in 6th grade. But I also pointed out to her how there were policemen and women, Black and white, who were protecting the freedom of speech of the KKK and the peaceful protesters, which, we all know is important, and especially important in our time now. Peaceful protest is allowed, but that's where I saw the KKK for real. And interesting you'll read the book, I hope one day. Or let me send it to you. But I also learned about, the glory of the Black soldiers who fought for freedom. And then when they returned home to America and the 369th Infantry marched down Harlem and everybody was so proud of the Black community, that was when riots started all over again within the United States. Klan membership had been on the decrease. Lynchings had been on the decrease. But after those servicemen came home for 3 years afterwards, there were all kinds of riots. Oklahoma, Georgia, Chicago. All of a sudden the threat of more seemingly to the KKK and others of an emancipated Black man was too much for them to bear. And that had, I think, something to do with the Tulsa race riot.
Interesting. What about in the publishing world? I know, Kelly, your book, I believe that it had some backing from the We Need Diverse Books group. Can you either of you ladies talk about your experiences? I know, Jewell, you've been in the publishing industry for quite some time. The story you described just then about being in Tulsa compared to your life as an author now, what changes have you seen in publishing to help diversify it, either as an author, the makeup of publishing staffs, etc.? What do you think about that?
Things have definitely gotten better. Little Brown is a really good place to be. They do celebrate diverse books and diverse authors. But I would say that I went from my first book, Black People Don't Read Books, it took 3 years to get published, to all different kinds of waves. There was a time where I had Black editors who said, get rid of the white woman in Douglas's Women, and I refused because she felt that I should only be writing for Black people. And I said, no, I write for everybody. So there was a time when things got even more segregated. There were times where I was writing another story and people would say, oh, you know, again, this is a Black story. They're speaking dialect, which actually it wasn't real dialect. It was more the rhythm. It was more like Toni Morrison's approach to Black speech, the rhythm of the language. And so I've had all kinds of ups and downs. I must say that as a children's author, my time has been most welcoming, but I'm actually now just thinking about getting back some of the rights to my earlier work because I want to be in control of it more. So just because Magic City was ahead of its time in terms of talking about the Tulsa race riot, I want that book to be more available to people. And so I'm hoping that that will happen. If not, I want to find ways to empower myself to make the stories I want to tell or have told even expand more. Kelly?
Yeah, and what I can say to that is my mother has her whole life fought for her right to tell stories and for everyone to be able to own and tell their stories. And yet, in my 20s, in my late 20s, I guess actually early 30s, I had a real big batch of imposter syndrome where I just truly felt like, you know, I didn't know what types of stories I was supposed to tell. I didn't know what I was allowed to tell. I was sort of reckoning with the way that the world treats women in particular. And my mother said, okay, so you're having trouble like writing your next book. Like there's this great organization called We Need Diverse Books, and they truly are great. If you're looking for book lists, any sort of classroom resources, I mean, they're fantastic. She said, you should submit your partial manuscript to them and see if anyone wants to mentor you. And I said, oh, no, I'm too scared. And at the time I was pregnant and just getting like more and more pregnant. And the deadline to turn this thing in, it was like right before I went into labor. And I remember literally hitting the button, like I was feeling the contractions and I was like, okay, if I want to be a writer, I got to get this show on the road. Press the button, sent the email. And then, you know, came back from like my little mini maternity leave. And I had a wonderful email in my inbox from the incomparable Jody Meadows, who is a writer for young adults. She wrote My Lady Jane, My Plain Jane, My Calamity Jane. They're all fantastic. And a trilogy to a fantasy trilogy. She's a wonderful, wonderful writer. She's actually 11 books in. And she took me under her wing. And she helped me fight through some of that sense that, you know, I was just a mom, just a stay-at-home mom, essentially, or that I was just trapped in my body's identity. She sort of helped give me that little boost, that permission to tell a story.
I have never met Jody, and I cannot wait to meet her because she has been such a fabulous mentor to Kelly. And there was a woman who mentored me that was also very important in my life. But it's really interesting how sometimes we can tell our kids how wonderful they are, you know, and they don't believe you because you're the parent who said it, you know, or that your words don't have that same kind of weight. And I thank my stars every day that Kelly met her mentor mom, because Jody has been utterly terrific. The power that each of us have to support one another, you know, is so important.